This man pulled a Bugs Bunny on the jury, on the entire Supreme Court. He fully said no. He was saying no, I'm not. They were saying yes, you are. No, I'm not. Yes, you are. No, I'm not. Yes, you are. Yes, I am. No, you're not. He really psyched them out.
Whoa.
He fully flipped them over. He beat them down.
He rabbit seasoned, duck seasoned them, you know?
Yeah. That's incredible. I love this man.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Unbelievable, the podcast where I, victim of a blatant slander campaign and complete political witch hunt that is obvious to anyone who's paying attention, Kurt Danner, joined here by my friend, the only person who's sad that he was too young to participate in MK Ultra, Luis Mejia.
Hello.
And today on this podcast, as usual, I will tell Luis two stories from history, one of them real, one of them fake.
And it's up to me, as always, to figure out which is which.
And Luis, today we have a theme because it is America's birth month. That's right, July. So today we are celebrating the greatest nation on earth, back-to-back World War champions,
All right.
The country where the only thing bigger than our soda cups is our military budget, the home of the American dream, which means making up your own rules, then breaking those rules, then making up new ones, and if anybody doesn't like any part of that process, then that's their problem.
Yeah, I mean, that's true. One of those rules that was broken was invading Mexico not once, but twice. So I guess you could also say back-to-back Mexico invader winners, you know? That's pretty fun. I will say, it's one of the greatest tragedies that I face in moving back to Mexico is not having just that unrelenting optimism about things that I know will go wrong that living in the U.S. gave me, which is really something I miss in my life lately. But you know what? It's okay. That arrogance, I try to bring that USA arrogance to my everyday living down in here in Mexico. And let me tell you, it's really good for going out to the club. It's really bad for making new friends. You know, you can't really win every single one, right?
Yeah. Well, today, Luis, you can have full 100% American arrogance on this podcast because we are celebrating the weirdest and wildest American history there is out there. But first, do you have a fact for me that maybe is true, maybe is false, but is most certainly bursting at the seams, overflowing with the American spirit?
Well, Kurt, I am glad you used the word bursting because it's pretty appropriate and pretty fitting for the fast fact I've got for you today, Kurt. So, true or false? There's a group of American businessmen in the good old US of A whose sole job, right, I guess, okay, let's just put it plainly, they're fireworks salesmen.
Okay.
They're fireworks salesmen in the U.S., and they're collectively known informally in certain parts of southwestern USA as the firework lobby.
Okay.
Because all they do is bribe, I guess, or give money to different hospitals and to different medical authorities to not classify firework-related injuries and deaths as firework-related injuries and deaths. Meaning that they go to hospitals and go to all these different local, say, police stations, fire stations, and say, hey, yes, report this injury, but do not place it down as a firework-related injury, all so that firework sales are not disrupted for the next upcoming years, especially around the time of July 4th. True or false, Kurt?
Wow. You know what, Luis? I feel like you might be baiting me with something that like sounds so American that I want to believe it. And if that's the case, you got me, because this sounds so true. This has got to be true, right? Of course the fireworks people are like...
I made it up, Kurt.
No?
You know,
no.
I've been had. Told me, come up with an American fast fact. And what is more American than... A, fireworks, and B, bribing local authorities. I mean, there's nothing better than that.
Lobbying your government to continue putting explosives in the hands of citizens for profit.
Yeah.
I mean, wow. Yeah, you nailed it, Luis.
Thank you.
You brought your A game.
You know, I decided to put on my USA hat today, figuratively speaking, because, you know, we're going back to those days of the Wild Wild West.
So our first story today, Luis, starts with obsession. And I think that you can appreciate, you know, being so obsessed with something that you have no business being obsessed with, just some random weird thing. an obsession that is so strong that it infects other people, that it influences other people.
Familiar, yeah.
So this is what the start of our story is. So first let's talk about who has this obsession. This is a man named Onus Carver. He's 35 years old in 1983, and he's living in Clearwater County in northern Idaho. He lives in a makeshift house that is a combination of a shack and a broken down Jeep.
A sheep.
And he's kind of living off the land, catching fish. He bathes in local streams. He'll cook over an open fire most days, and he'll also collect cans and scrap metal or do odd jobs for people in nearby towns. So he's a very self-sufficient guy.
Yeah, very good. Very, very Henry David Thoreau-like.
Yeah, except like a little more ragged. So what is it that Onus Carver is obsessed with? Onus Carver is obsessed with Goat Tooth Peak. Goat Tooth Peak is a small peak in the Sawtooth Mountain Range in northern Idaho. The Sawtooth Mountains are named for their appearance. They look kind of like the jagged teeth of a saw blade. And Goat Tooth Peak is named for the wild goat population that lives in the region. So now you might be wondering why. What's so special about Goat Tooth Mountain? Or maybe you're not, because knowing you, Luis, maybe if just like carte blanche, someone came to you and said, hey, Goat Tooth Mountain, you'd be like, I'm in.
I mean, you're right. You are correct, Kurt. I mean, you tell me Goat Tooth Mountain, I don't need to hear more. I'm set, and I'm excited already.
You had me at Goat Tooth.
Yeah.
Well, in case you were skeptical, Luis, let me tell you what's so special about Goat Tooth Mountain. It was the only remaining unclimbed peak in the Sawtooth Mountain Range back in 1983. And this is because the surface of Goat Tooth Mountain is really steep, but also because the Sawtooth Mountains were formed by glaciers and ice erosion. So the rock is very brittle and crumbles easily. So if you try to like put bolts in it or make permanent fixtures for climbing, it won't hold them. Also, there's no real reason to climb Goat Tooth Peak. There's not like anything up there. It's not a very big mountain.
Let's be honest, Kurt. Is there any real reason to climb any big, tall mountain? Not really. I mean, I think that's just the end where our curiosity takes us. I mean, no one needed to climb Mount Everest, and now 1,000 people die there every year? Maybe that's an exaggeration, but there's no need. Listen, I agree with all the people climbing all these mountains. What do you need as an excuse to climb a big mountain? Then you're climbing Big Mountain. That's all I need.
I mean, I think that's just something very innately human about wanting to stand at the highest point or be higher up than everyone else. But I'm going to send you a picture of Goat Tooth Peak, and so you can tell me what you think of it.
Look at that. Wow. I mean, I cannot say I've ever seen a goat tooth. But if you were to tell me that looks like a goat tooth, I will trust you.
Well, it's only named Goat Tooth kind of by accident because they got the tooth part from the Sawtooth Mountain Range and then the goat part from the goats that live there. So, I mean, maybe that's what a goat tooth looks like. I can't say that I'm intimately familiar with goat teeth either.
For a silly little guy like me, you need to be a little more clever with your names. Name it goat tooth if it looks like a goat tooth, not just because there's goats there. That's something I would do. Don't make my mistakes.
Well, Luis, I'll let you in on a little insider secret of this story, that this is not the final name that this rock is going to have. So maybe you'll like the name that's coming later. But you're going to have to wait. Because first we have to talk about why is Onus so obsessed with this? I mean, okay, there's some interest to it, but what is the deal with Onus, right? Onus might be a bit weird because it seems he's had a bit of a rough life. Not much actually is known about his life, but he was drafted into the Vietnam War in 1968. After coming home in 1969, he stayed in the military and was given a desk job at UC Berkeley, and he claims to have been dosed with an unknown chemical as part of the MK Ultra experiments.
Nice.
So, Luis, you may know MK Ultra were the illegal human experimentation programs conducted by the CIA from 1953 to 1973. And their goal was to explore the potential of drugs for advanced interrogation methods, or to put it in a more sci-fi way, they were trying to find a mind control drug. Most famously, they were known for dosing people with LSD, some of them knowingly, some of them unknowingly, but there was also a lot of stuff involved with electroshock therapy, sensory deprivation, long-term isolation, physical abuse and torture, and they also dosed people with psilocybin, mescaline, cocaine, DMT, and AMT.
The usual suspects.
All the, the classic grocery list.
Right.
But in 1973, the CIA director ordered for all the records of MK Ultra and the records of MK Ultra patients to be destroyed, so there is very little surviving information about the program ultimately. This is why Onus can only technically claim to have been a part of MK Ultra, because there's no way to verify it, but also he knew about it before a bunch of the stuff was declassified. So that seems pretty obvious. But also because of the wide range of what happened in the program, that doesn't necessarily mean he was given drugs, or we wouldn't necessarily know what drugs they are, but this might have contributed to how he ended up getting obsessed with a rock called Goat Tooth Mountain. Either way, in 1974, Onus was discharged from the Army. Somehow he ended up driving through Idaho in early 1975. His Jeep ran out of gas and he didn't have any money, so he began to live in his Jeep. And later he rolled his Jeep up to the abandoned shed to make the full Jeep shed combination home. And then he learned about Goat Tooth Mountain because he could actually see it from his shack. That's when he became obsessed with trying to climb Goat Tooth Mountain. And it's unknown if Onus had any mountain climbing experience, but either way, he's going for it.
Yeah.
Okay.
Hell yeah. That's the American optimism about things that might not work that I was talking about at the beginning of the episode, Kurt.
Yes, that's the American dream in action. So in 1976, Onus attempts several times freehand, so, just climbing by hand, or with a pickaxe that he found. He is not even able to make it halfway up the rock. In early 1977, he tries drilling holes in the rock to insert bolts, but the rocks crumble too much for most of the bolts to hold his weight, as forecasted. Towards the end of 1977, he manages to climb over 2/3 of the way up using only his pickaxe that he found.
Wow.
But then a rock breaks off and Onus falls. Luckily, he's caught by a safety rope that is attached to one of the bolts he drilled that actually held, but the impact from the sudden stop breaks one of his ribs, and so he's forced to take some time off. In the spring of 1978, though, Onus is back with the new plan, and Luis, get ready because this is going to blow you away.
I'm ready.
Big ladder.
Oh,
big ladder.
Come on. Why didn't you think of that at first, man? I mean, listen, from the very beginning of the story, I'm like, what? Have you tried a ladder? Let's talk about it. There's a very famous Mexican, Veracruzan folkloric song. You might know it, Kurt. It's named La Bamba, right? La Bamba, Veracruz folk song. One of the original lyrics, or one of the lyrics that has been passed around generation after generation, tells us a very, maybe it's a metaphor, but I see it as a piece of advice. The lyric says, in order to reach heaven, you need a big ladder and a small ladder. So don't know what that means, but again, if you're trying to get anywhere, you just need a couple ladders. And I live by that.
The point is, big ladder.
What's clear is that Onus had never heard of La Bamba back then. That's his loss, frankly.
That's true. That's true. His loss. So, piece by piece, Onus carries lumber to the base of the peak. Over the next few months, he constructs a ladder, first approximately 20 feet tall, then little by little, he'll kind of add more wood and test its stability. For the record, the peak is 340 feet from the base of the ladder, so I don't know if he's planning to go all the way to the top. Maybe the idea is that it can, get him halfway there. There's also this story that Onus had separately considered trying to build, a giant pole vaulting stick and pole vault his way to the top.
That's
but
incredible.
That might have been a rumor that was started as a joke. There's no confirmation that he actually had that plan.
There's no confirmation nor any denial, Kurt, so I'm taking it as fact. Taking it as gospel.
True. Equal odds. June 1978, the ladder had reached all the way to 50 feet in length. And at this point, local climbers start to notice Onus. No one tries to stop him. They're more just kind of intrigued with what's going on here.
Yeah, good.
At the point that the ladder is around 70 feet tall, it buckles and breaks under its own weight and falls. And this is actually while Onus is on the ladder, so he's forced to quickly grab onto the mountain to avoid falling. Then he's forced to climb down. After this, he kind of abandons the ladder plan. Local hikers see Onus attempt a few climbs freehand during the rest of 1978 and 1979, presumably without much success. But in 1981, he's back with a new plan again. So, this one even better than the last one, Luis. After months of work, Onus has completed construction on a homemade hang glider.
Yes.
And the plan is to hike halfway up the nearby Thompson Peak, then glide down onto the Goat Tooth. This is like some Wile E. Coyote stuff. What is going on here?
Yeah.
So, on April 4th, 1981, Onus Carver hikes halfway up Thompson Peak, then begins his elegant glide down to the Goat Tooth, except it's only an elegant glide for about 5 seconds, then a strong gust of wind hits and rips the right wing of the hang glider, causing Onus to spiral down 435 feet to the ground below. And this is, of course, a fatal crash. And the worst part of this, Luis, is that people knew this was happening because over the years, the local curiosity about Onus trying to climb the Goat Tooth had spread. Also, Onus has lived in his shack Jeep combo, his sheep or Jack for 6 years now. So lots of people have gotten to know him. And he also had purchased specially cut and stitched sailcloth from a local town fabric supplier for the hang glider. So everybody knew about this from the word of mouth. And some people had even come to watch. but no one ever stopped him during this process. So afterwards, the local townspeople feel understandably a little uneasy about the whole thing.
Yeah, they feel responsible is what they feel, not necessarily uneasy. They feel responsible. They're complicit. They're complicit in this man's death.
I think they also thought it was some Wile E. Coyote stuff. They were like, oh no, he'll just get like a big bump on his head with another big bump on top of it. And then some stars will circle around and he'll walk it off.
This reminds me of the video of one of the men that had one of the first prototypes for a parachute. A French man who decided to jump off of the first story of the Eiffel Tower.
Yeah, to prove that his parachute.
Yeah, to prove
work.
to the, I'll show those fools. They laughed at me at the academy. They laughed at me at university, but I'll show them. And jumps off, immediately falls to his death. You know, there is something to be said about the people that have just such trust in their work. You know, there's a little bit of bravado. Everyone else is just hoping that this man's arrogance will pay off. I think that's the American way.
Truly.
Waiting for someone's arrogance to pay off.
Yeah, truly. You know, no matter how wild the idea is, you got to respect them if they're willing to go splat over it, you know? Because that man with the parachute definitely went splat, and Onus Carver definitely went splat. You know, all for the goat tooth. All for the goat
everything
tooth.
for the goat tooth.
So to commemorate Onus's dedication to climbing the goat tooth, they put a marker at the base of Goat Tooth Mountain, and locals actually began unofficially referring to it as Carver's Point. This is the renaming that I mentioned earlier.
Nice.
Onus's story renews interest in the unclimbed mountain, and locals and tourists began attempting to climb it here and there. And it seems that Carver's Point is truly a difficult mountain to climb because no one is really able to even make a very decent attempt at it. In 1983, the state of Idaho offered a reward of $500 to the first person to summit Carver's Point. This is probably in an attempt to drum up some ecotourism.
Oh my God, this is being more complicit in potential deaths. My God, the state of Idaho is doubling down.
No,
we saw a person die.
Happen.
Let them all die. Let them all try it. This story is not over yet.
Maybe they're like, well, technically Onus died on Thompson Peak, you know, because he never made it close enough to the goat tooth.
Come on.
So several climbers attempt through 1983 and 1984, presumably unsuccessful. Then we come to August 9th, 1984, and who could have predicted this? Two climbers, Robbie Anders and Stanley Crawford, fall while climbing Carver's Point. They're tied to each other with a rope that's fastened to bolts. So something causes Robbie to slip, and he pulls Stanley off the rock with him. And then the bolt breaks out of the rock instead of breaking their fall, so nothing stops them from falling to the rocks below.
Knew it.
Robbie Anders is killed. Stanley Crawford suffers 3 broken ribs, a fractured collarbone, and severe internal bleeding, but ultimately survives. And afterwards, the Idaho Department of Wildlife and Conservation declared Carver's Point closed to climbers.
Okay, good. Yeah.
Until
we
come up to 1990.
Come on.
Enter Joseph Mars, 35-year-old millionaire and COO of his family's company, a little candy bar corporation you might have heard about, Louis, called Mars Incorporated.
Okay.
And apparently Joseph Mars also dabbles in a little rock climbing. So he tells the state of Idaho his plan to climb with a harness that is attached to a crane. So that way if he falls, you know, the crane will catch him no matter what. And so he can become the first person to summit Carver's Point. And maybe there's also a little donation in it for the state of Idaho. Who knows?
You know, I know that this man is probably a real person, but since he's, the COO of Mars, I just imagine the red M&M climbing Carver's Point. I can see the commercial of M&Ms in my brain, just them trying to climb Carver's Point. Green M&M slips, falls, dies a terrible death by SPLAT, and brown M&M is just looking up from above, looking down judgmentally to the rabbit M&M that's climbing up.
Wow.
I see it all.
You need to go outside more. So anyway, preparations began for Joseph Mars' climb right away. They actually have to clear a path to build a road for the crane to be able to reach Carver's Point because it's not exactly close to civilization. And also experts hired by Joseph Mars began surveying Carver's Point to determine the best possible approach. So they're looking for the best climbing route for him. The climb is scheduled to take place on July 4th, 1990.
Nice.
So he's going to climb it on the 4th of July.
Yeah, good.
But before this can happen, we have to go back to 1989 and enter a different character, Catherine Hart, who is a speleologist, which is someone who studies and explores caves. So Catherine graduated from the University of Idaho in May 1989. She decided to take a gap year before going on to grad school, so she's spending the gap year hiking and exploring caves around Idaho. In May 1990, Catherine was exploring caves in the Sawtooth Mountain Range, and on May 12th, while exploring a cave, she discovered a narrow cavern in the cave ceiling. So it's sort of like a jaggedy chimney that's like weaving side to side.
Yeah.
It's been carved out by water runoff. It's a very narrow squeeze, but Catherine is only 5'2" and approximately 100 pounds. Even though this is the America episode, I'll say for my metric homies, that's 1.5 meters, 45 kilos.
Thank you.
She's small, is the point. Catherine squeezes into this little chimney space and shimmies up a total of 190 feet. Then at the top, the opening of the chimney is a small crack that comes out near the top of Carver's Point. Catherine squeezes through the crack and then free climbs the final portion to the summit of Carver's Point, and local hikers see her standing at the top waving.
No way.
After this, several people are not happy, right? Everyone is typing in the chat. Joseph Mars, obviously, is first in line. He's pretty mad about being snubbed for this whole thing he was preparing. The state of Idaho, then secondly, is mad because the whole Joseph Mars operation got ruined, but also because Carver's Point was supposed to be close to the public. Catherine actually points out that it was closed to public for rock climbers. She technically spelunked her way to the top, so she didn't break any rules.
Oh, yes.
Interestingly, Idaho technically never retracted the reward money, so Catherine could theoretically try to claim it. But despite the fact that it's still kind of out there, between Idaho being mad and the gray area of legality, maybe a little bit of sexism, there's pretty much no way that they're going to give her the reward. But she actually did not even try to claim it, because when Catherine summited to the top of Carver's Point, she found, jammed between two rocks, a tomahawk head.
Oh.
Meaning that Carver's Point was climbed by at least one indigenous person, maybe by pole vaulting method, a long time ago, but nobody ever knew. I threw in the pole vaulting thing. There's no way to know.
Who knows? It could have been a ladder.
Someone had already climbed it. Could have been a ladder. Big ladder.
Yeah. Wow. And so what? Did Joseph Mars do his thing?
No, he didn't care after that. Because like I said, there's no real significance to Goat Tooth Mountain / Carver's Point other than it was the last unclimbed peak that this guy died Wile E. Coyote style trying to summit.
Surprised no one else tried to Wile E. Coyote his way just to honor his memory. Again, just hang glide from the other one. A better hang glide.
That's true, They could have come back. Well, maybe there was the same problem with the wind. I don't think that that Onus Carver necessarily had a background in hang gliding, although maybe he did. But I'm assuming it probably wasn't hang gliding conditions given how quickly he failed.
Have you ever considered maybe the reason why Onus Carver was so obsessed with this mountain was indeed because of MK Ultra, but not in the way you may expect? Okay, so the US tells us that MK Ultra was not a success. Pumping all these drugs into people really just made them go mad, not necessarily make them reveal all the information or allow the US to mind read them. However, what if it gave Onus Carver mind reading powers of his own? Okay, so he came out of MK Ultra able to read everyone's brain, but he had no way to control it. And so he had to go to the most remote place ever in order to silence the voices of everyone else around him and realize the only place where there would be no interference from other people's brainwaves would be on top of this mountain. And thus he started devising a plan to go up there. The gears are kicking. The gears are spinning, Kurt. The wheels are moving.
Yeah.
I can see the screenplay unfold in front of me.
You know what? I'll do you one better, Luis. What if MK Ultra accidentally gave him the power to see the future, and he was like, this is the only way to save Idaho tourism.
Yeah.
And then plummeted off top.
He actually met Joseph Mars in high school and hated him. He's like, I'm going to screw this man over, and was able to see into the future.
How can I hurt Joseph Mars the most?
Yeah.
Destroy his company? No. Stop him from climbing the Goat Tooth.
As he's falling down the side of the mountain on his failed hang glider, he's thinking, Joseph Mars, I finally got you. Splat.
Checkmate, Joseph Mars. Splat.
I will say, I appreciate that there was a name change to Goat Tooth Peak to Carver's Point, but I hate to be this guy. Bad name change. It took away.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
I'm sorry.
That's
the cool
tough.
factor left. I'm sorry. If anything, Carver should name the gap that he fell into. Carver's Gap. I don't know. Just spitballing here.
Yeah. What would you name it, Luis? Whip it out right now. Since you're such the critic of the names, what do you got?
Kurt, I'm going to let you in on a little secret into my life, Kurt. I am very good at giving advice that I'm not willing to follow myself. Okay, so I'm just saying.
I'm gonna let you in on a little secret, Luis. That's not a secret.
All right. Well, let's just say that I'm open to criticism, and I'm open to criticize myself, but I'm not here to give a better name, Kurt. I'm not going to give the answers. I'm not going to solve the world with this podcast. I'm just here to raise questions, like a Play-Doh over time.
Just asking questions. You're just asking questions.
Just asking questions.
Just call it like you see it, you know?
Yeah. Yeah. Maybe I'm just the best of all of us because I don't need to give input, Kurt. Who knows?
Here we go again, Icarus. So, Luis, for our next story, we are just going to dive straight into it, okay? Right into the chaos, all right?
I'm ready.
January 3rd, 1941, newly elected senator from North Dakota, a man named William Wild Bill Langer, arrived in Washington, D.C., ready to swear his oath of office and be seated in the Senate. But before this could happen, the Senate Majority Leader, a man named Alben Barkley of Kentucky, announced that he had received a petition from North Dakota residents, and this petition basically said that Wild Bill Langer is unfit to serve in the United States Congress. He is a dirty con man owing to his, quote, moral turpitude.
Okay, nice.
So the Senate is unsure what to do. Basically, people of North Dakota just voted this guy into office and then also sent him a petition saying, no way can this guy be in office. So they seat Bill Langer temporarily and open a committee to investigate his, quote unquote, moral turpitude.
Open a committee to plan on how to murder this man. A petition for political assassination.
First, they have to decide if they need to murder this man, you know?
Okay, yeah, of course.
But this is a real record scratch moment. You know, how did we get here? This seems like an unprecedented moment in American politics, but, you know, it's always an unprecedented moment in American politics.
Yeah.
So this committee ends up, to try to decide the moral turpitude of Bill Langer, ends up looking at basically his whole record. So let's go back, and Luis, join me as we examine the record of Bill Langer, and you decide, should he be a senator or not?
Because as we know, I am the person best fitted to decide on someone's mental what is it? Mental, yeah, you know.
I mean, you are the advice guy, you know.
I am the advice guy.
Didn't we establish that?
Yeah.
Can you follow it? No, but you sure can give it.
I can give it. So let's hear it, Kurt. Get ready for my input.
All right, let's do it. So Bill Langer was born in 1886 to German-American parents, Frank and Mary Langer, in the Dakota Territory. This is when it was still a territory, so they're not states yet. And he grew up fluently speaking both English and German. Shortly after Bill's birth, the Dakota Territory was divided up into the states of North and South Dakota, and Bill's father served in North Dakota's first legislature. In 1904, Bill graduated from the University of North Dakota with a bachelor's degree in law, but he was actually too young at the time to practice law, so he decided to continue his education at Columbia University and graduated at the top of his class in 1910. After he graduated, he got an offer from a pretty prestigious New York law firm, but instead he decided to return to North Dakota and work for the Morton County State's Attorney. So this is the beginning of Bill's career as a lawyer. And by all accounts, as a lawyer, he was really a force to be reckoned with. So much so that after only a few years, Bill was promoted from Assistant State Attorney of Morton County to State Attorney of Morton County. So he's got the big chair now.
Yeah.
On his first day of being State Attorney of Morton County, he issued 167 warrants for the arrest of various liquor dealers and, quote, vice operators.
Nice.
So this is because in North Dakota's state constitution, alcohol was prohibited until 1932. But on his first day, Bill Langer sent out 167 of these warrants. He also later successfully sued the Northern Pacific Railway for over $1 million in back taxes, which is like a pretty big deal to go after the railroad.
Damn, yeah.
So, likely owing to these achievements, he was elected State Attorney General in 1916. But he also did this with the help of the powerful Nonpartisan League, or the NPL. The NPL was a faction within the North Dakota Republican Party, and they were basically like radical socialist farmers.
Oh.
They had ideas that they wanted to push, such as state-controlled banks, state-controlled slaughterhouses and grain mills, They wanted huge subsidies for farmers. They wanted government-insured and government-regulated markets. They were also very isolationist, so on a big scale, that means like they want America to focus on American problems, but even on a small scale, they wanted like North Dakota just to be focusing on North Dakotans' problems. They wanted huge subsidies and tax breaks that would go towards trying to make North Dakota entirely self-reliant. And these policies were very popular at the time because many North Dakotans were struggling to survive through the Great Depression. So the NPL is just an extremely powerful faction. Bill Langer is well ingrained in them, and so that contributes to a lot of his political momentum. Now we come to his years as state attorney general, and I think that Saul Goodman would be a big fan of how Bill Langer operated.
Okay.
So I call these years the Better Call Bill years.
Yeah. Nice.
So first order of business, clean up the mean streets of Minot. Minot is apparently this town that had a lot of crime going on. So Wild Bill and 50 detectives went to Minot disguised as laborers. All of them have been deputized with the authority of U.S. Marshals, courtesy of Wild Bill. And so they live undercover in the town for 3 weeks. Then they raid several locations that were serving alcohol, making 156 arrests. And some of them were prominent members of the town that they arrested. And the population of Minot was only around 17,000 at the time. So, like, it's not a very big town.
I was going to ask. I'm sure it's very easy to clean up crime in a town that's 100 people strong.
Also, they wanted to make sure that, like, when they went to the first place and arrested the people, that they couldn't, like, call the other places and warn them. So Wild Bill cut the town's phone lines.
Oh.
And they, like, didn't warn the phone company ahead of time that they were going to do this. They just, on the day of, showed up at the phone company and took it over by gunpoint. So in the middle of all this, to add to the chaos, the phone company has Langer arrested for, like, commandeering their phone lines. But they later dropped the charges.
Nah, you guys don't understand. He was being strategic, playing 4D chess for everyone. I'm helping you guys out. Come on.
He saw it all, man.
Yeah.
In 1932, there was an incident. Langer was still practicing as a private attorney, even when he was state attorney general, and he was representing a man accused of murder. The only witness to this alleged murder was the man's ex-wife. So Langer kidnapped his client from the local jail or broke him out, depending on how you look at it.
Yeah.
Then he transported the man and his ex-wife across state lines, convinced the ex-wife to remarry her husband so that she couldn't be asked to testify against him, and promised the wife that he would arrange a second divorce free of charge after the trial was over. So they remarried. She did not testify. The man was acquitted, and then the woman went on to remarry someone else, only to discover 9 years later that Langer hadn't actually followed through on the second divorce, and so she was still technically married to her alleged murderer ex-husband.
Yeah.
And then here's a few other things Bill Langer did as state attorney general. He threatened to arrest parents whose children broke mandatory school attendance laws. He censured 275 schools for failing to display the American flag. And he survived an impeachment attempt by only 1 vote. So, as you can see, pretty much always Wild Bill Langer was a controversial character.
He cleaned up the criminals in that town, but what you don't know is that the criminals were just all kids that fell asleep during the Pledge of Allegiance.
Exactly. But, you know, whatever he's doing, it must have been very popular, because also in 1932, this is the same year as the breaking out the alleged murder client scheme, Bill Langer was elected governor of North Dakota.
My God.
This is largely with the help of the NPL. So Langer had actually had a brief falling out with the NPL, the nonpartisan league. He is saying that they neglected the needs of North Dakota's farmers, and he accused the founder of Bolshevism, which, like, wow, they got some wild stuff going on over in North Dakota.
Oh, wait, hold on. Wasn't this a socialist group to begin with? Of course he's being accused of Bolshevism, right?
I guess it's the wrong type of socialist.
Oh, right. Yeah, sorry.
I don't know. But either way, Langer did not have a very good time trying to go against the NPL because they're pretty powerful. So he basically ended up having to buy his way back into their favor. And in exchange for that, they delivered him the governor's election. So Bill Langer is now the governor. And these are the years where he would earn the name Wild Bill. So his first action as governor, he placed a moratorium on all debts for 5 years. Later, he revised this to forbid foreclosures on properties. But the intended effect of this was to protect struggling farmers of North Dakota from losing their farms because of debts they couldn't pay. The federal government fought pretty hard against this, but Wild Bill did not budge. In some cases, he even deployed the National Guard to prevent sheriffs from foreclosing and selling the farms of debtors.
Wow.
So he's not messing around. He cut back the state government spending on pretty much everything except education. And in 1933, when the price of wheat began to fall dramatically, threatening the livelihoods of many North Dakotan farmers, Langer placed an embargo on out-of-state wheat. So he's basically like, you can't import any wheat into North Dakota.
Accuse him of Bolshevism, damn.
I know. But this worked because the price of wheat rose 5 cents on the first day and actually continued rising until a few months later when a federal district court struck down the embargo. But for Langer, this is kind of the best of both worlds because he got like the short-term success bump while avoiding the potentially negative long-term effects of a wheat trade embargo in North Dakota.
Yeah, right. Yeah, common in the Dakotas.
I mean 4D, 5D chess, Luis. You know, he saw it coming a long way away.
Yeah.
Right. Now we come to the scandal. Every politician has to have a good scandal, you know, and you certainly do not earn a name like Wild Bill without having your own scandal. So here we go. Remember, Bill Langer was only elected with the help of the massively popular NPL. So once he's in office, it is all power to the almighty NPL, baby. Oh, yeah.
Oh, yeah.
One of Wild Bill's acts as governors was he required all federal employees to donate 5% of their annual salary to the NPL and also to a newspaper owned by high-ranking officials in the state government called The Leader. And The Leader is, of course, very, very sympathetic to Governor Bill Langer. This seems pretty insane now, right? But at the time, this was actually considered fully legal, maybe a little unethical, but there's kind of this idea that federal employees should show gratitude to the person who put them in power and also who's running their government.
That's just Mexican politics now.
Yeah, so, you know, I guess I should say, even though we're America-themed here, this is a very American way to look at it. This seems insane because I guess in some other governments this would be seen as normal.
Right. I mean, I write my checks every month to the Leader also. We just call him El Líder here, yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Every single, I don't know who he is. I actually just put it in the mail. It doesn't even have an address, and somehow it just gets mailed anyway.
It gets to the right place. It always gets to the right place. Employees of the government who paid their 5% of their annual salary also would receive a subscription of the Leader. And if they wished to recoup a little bit of their lost salary, they were encouraged to try to sell subscriptions of the Leader to their friends and family. So, as you can imagine, Luis, this is a very effective fundraising and distribution tactic. The Leader quickly became the most circulated weekly newspaper in North Dakota for whatever that is worth.
Yeah, 14 people weekly.
Rich in monopoly money, you know? But their big mistake here was that Langer's government also collected salary from some highway department employees. And kind of comically, this amount only ended up amounting to $469 out of a total of over $58,000 that they collected. But the problem is that the highway department workers were being paid from a government relief fund. So soliciting and collecting federal funds for political purposes is a big no-no. As one North Dakota Democrat put it in a letter to President Roosevelt, the North Dakota Relief Fund has now become the Governor Langer Relief Fund. They're not very happy about this, and so Governor Wild Bill Langer and 8 others are charged with misuse of government funds. So the trial begins May 1934. There's 9 defendants in total, but obviously all eyes are on Wild Bill, who absolutely does not miss a single opportunity to turn the thing into a circus. Witnesses reported that Langer sat nonchalantly at the defendant table, chewing on an unlit cigar with the cellophane still attached to it.
Power move.
Then, when one of the jurors, this guy named Les Hewlett, he knew Langer personally, but he had downplayed this fact when they were doing the jury selection, so he was allowed to remain in the jury pool. But then when he walked past the defendant's table, Langer saw him and jumps up and gives him this loud over-the-top greeting and puts his arm around him and starts making small talk. So everyone in the courtroom can very clearly tell that these two people know each other personally. The judge was very not happy about this. Langer took the stand during the trial, and when he was on the stand, he kept a relaxed demeanor. He told the court that when he had learned the federal relief funds were being solicited, he had directed the collections to stop, and genuinely, he was really confused because, quote, he thought the whole thing had been cleared up. In response to some questions they asked him about transfers of money from the Leader's bank account to his own personal account, Langer tells them that he had paid out of pocket to start the newspaper, so actually, the NPL owed him $20,000, and he was just simply reimbursing himself.
That's awesome. That's a reverse. That's good. No, Your Honor, you don't understand. They owed me that money.
The man can stick and move. I mean, he's a slippery guy.
You can tell he was a lawyer, Tim.
I know. So, December 1934, after 3 days of deliberation, the jury delivered a guilty verdict, and the judge sentenced Langer to 18 months in jail and a $10,000 fine. Langer claimed the judge and prosecution had conspired against him and were politically motivated, so he's whipping out the evergreen defense here of, it's a witch hunt.
Yeah, works.
He might actually be right in this case, though, because whether or not it's true that Langer was treated fairly or unfairly, it is true that both the judge and the prosecutor specifically disliked Langer for some shenanigans he'd pulled earlier in his career. Yeah. And Also, clearly, the jury selection process was done at least a bit loosely because this guy who personally knew him ended up in the jury. So Langer immediately appeals the decision, but the bigger problem here is that convicted felons can't serve as governor. So the court declares that the lieutenant governor, this guy named Ollie Olson, which, by the way, I think his first name is pronounced Ollie, but it's O-L-E, so it could be like Olson.
Ol?
Yeah. So Ollie, or Ol, is declared to be the governor of North Dakota and will serve out the remainder of Langer's term. So Ollie, or Ol, goes to Bismarck for the transition of power, but before he can even arrive in Bismarck, the state attorney general, this guy named P.O. Sather, ruled that since Langer had appealed, technically the legal process wasn't finished, because he's like, well, we don't know that he'll ultimately be convicted, so he's still the governor for now. Ollie Olson appealed this decision then to the state Supreme Court, who overturned it, so they're like, nope, Langer is not the governor again, and so then Ollie Olson finally does arrive in Bismarck, only to discover that Langer and a few friends had barricaded themselves in his office in the governor's mansion and locked down the building.
Yes.
They have National Guardsmen posted at every door, and a large crowd had gathered outside the governor's mansion, and Langer is claiming that the National Guard is only present to quote-unquote keep the peace, but Olson completely does not trust that, and probably rightfully so, because Langer also says that he's not coming out until the Supreme Court justices of the state come to speak with him.
That's amazing.
Yeah, he's a do-or-die kind of guy, you know? But finally, one of the National Guardsmen, this guy named General Earl Sarles, convinces Langer to leave the governor's mansion, and Langer does. So now he kind of is at rock bottom because he's been kicked out of office. He can't run again because of the felony. He can't even practice law because of the felony. He tries to run his wife as governor in 1934, but she loses to this guy named Thomas Moody. So, you know, it seems like not many prospects at this point. Most people probably at this junction would give up. But let me tell you something, Luis. Wild Bill Langer only knows how to do two things, and that's slit throats and get votes. So we're back on the horse, okay?
Yeah.
He starts investigating the new governor, Thomas Moody. He knows Moody is a Minnesota native. Somehow he discovers that Moody voted in the Minnesota election in 1934 years ago, which means that he couldn't possibly have met the residency requirements to be governor of North Dakota. Basically, he's saying if he voted in Minnesota 4 years ago, he had to be registered as a resident of that state, which means he can't have been registered as a resident of North Dakota for long enough to be eligible for governor. Langer gives this information to the North Dakota Supreme Court, and so for the second time in 6 months, the North Dakota legal system kicks its own governor out of office. And this is less than a month even into Moody's term, so like right away, Bill Langer is just like, you're out of here. Moody's replacement, this guy named Walter Welford, gets put in as governor. He is extremely thankful to Langer. He basically tells Langer, I know the only reason I'm here is because you got rid of the other guy. He's probably a little bit scared, in all honesty.
As you should be, frankly.
As he should be.
Wild Bill is sitting there in the corner, and you do not go talk to him unless it is to thank him for his service.
That's true. While this has all been going on, Langer has also been fighting his convictions in the courts. So in 1935, first he appeals on the basis that the judge was biased. Remember, they've got the witch hunt defense going on. He files a motion for a replacement judge, but the judge that he's saying is biased is the one who reviews this request. So he denies it, which then results in a hung jury. But then the prosecuting attorney files charges against Langer, claiming that he perjured himself in the motion to replace the judge. So then instead they go to a perjury trial. And somehow in that perjury trial, they find Langer not guilty of everything, but then they have to have another trial where they're basically like, let's just redo the original trial for the misuse of government funds, and they find Langer not guilty. My boy beat the charges. He's off. What?
Yes, he. This man pulled a Bugs Bunny on the jury on the entire Supreme Court of the state of North Dakota. He fully said no. He was saying no, I'm not. They were saying yes, you are. No, I'm not. Yes, you are. No, I'm not. Yes, you are. Yes, I am. No, you're not. He really psyched them out.
Whoa.
He fully flipped them over. He beat them down.
He rabbit seasoned, duck seasoned them, you know?
Yeah. That's incredible. I love this man.
Now it's 1936, time for The Return of the King or Wild Bill Governor 2.0, Electric Boogaloo.
Ooh,
either one.
Yes.
But first, there's a couple speed bumps here. Walter Welford, amazingly, has suddenly forgotten how grateful he is to Wild Bill, and he is not going to get out of the way for Langer to run in the Republican primary.
Come on.
Also, several political groups have formed specifically against Langer called the Anti-Langer Leaguers, or also they get this nickname of Rumpers for some reason.
Okay, yeah.
So all this culminates in Langer losing the 1936 Republican primary to Walter Welford by 700 votes. But no worries, you can't stop Wild Bill Langer. He'll just run as an independent independent. So then that makes the 1936 North Dakota governor election a three-way race between Republican Walter Welford, Democrat John Moses, and independent Bill Langer. Walter Welford campaigned saying that Langer, quote, lives for politics. He doesn't live for farmers, nor does he live for anybody unless he can get them in his clutches. Which, yeah, he's pretty spot on there. However, Langer boasted, quote, the federal government spent $1 million to find me honest. I am the only candidate to be inspected by the U.S. government and found to be 100% pure. I mean, the man can work them, right?
I agree. I'm sorry. I agree with this.
He's got your vote?
Yeah, of course he's got my vote, Kurt. Come on. I see myself in this man.
Well, he got a lot of other votes too because he narrowly defeated Welford with 36% of the vote. And that 36%, is kind of a weird number that only works in a three-way election where 36% of the population of North Dakota picked the governor. But that was enough to win him the election. So 1937, 3 years after being kicked out of the governor's office, Wild Bill Langer is back. And this is his second time as governor now, from 1937 to 1939, during the last years of the Great Depression. There's extreme poverty in rural North Dakota communities. Langer pushed for welfare legislation and guaranteed the price of wheat when it fell too low. So he did what he could to kind of mitigate the problems of poverty, but all of these achievements were overshadowed by allegations of corruption and bribery, basically at every level, down to public officials. You're handing them like a $5 bill, but up to Langer got a suspicious donation, and then all of a sudden this company got a permit. And all of these allegations are true, by the way.
He cannot beat them. They're there.
I mean, yeah, all of them are spot on. All the rumors are true. But despite all this, in 1940, Wild Bill Langer was elected as North Dakota's senator. Wow. So then we come up to January 3rd, 1941, where Bill Langer arrives in Washington, D.C., and he's ready to swear his oath of office, and the Senate receives a petition from North Dakota citizens saying, this guy is dirty, he's rife with moral turpitude, you can't have him in here. And so they temporarily seat Bill Langer and open the committee. So the committee investigates and debates for over a year. At this point, Luis, if you're the head of committee, you're the czar of the Bill Langer committee, what would you do?
Oh, it depends where I'm from. If I'm from a big city state like New York, I probably won't think too much of, what's a little corruption if we're in a big state like ours, right? But then,
what are you gonna do about that? That's always going on.
Right. I mean, it's 1940s USA in the Senate. Come on, I feel like,
come on.
I feel like the senators during this committee must be thinking, you're really worried about this guy? I mean, I don't know, but I feel like the senators probably are not as worried as people that know him personally or had to live through his tenure as governor twice.
So you're in the seat Bill Langer camp.
I am, but not necessarily because I think he's innocent or maybe because he deserves to be a senator. I just feel like these allegations or these...
You just don't care.
I feel like he's going to fit right in, and everyone that's coming after him in this trial underestimates just how little the Senate will care. That's my thought.
Okay, so after a year of investigations, 1942, the committee reports that Bill Langer, quote, lacked the moral fitness to be a senator. They describe his behavior as, quote, lawlessness, shotgun law enforcement, jailbreaking, a continuous, contemptuous, and shameful disregard for the high concepts of public duty.
Oh, come on.
Basically,
that's what you need.
No way. Hold on, Luis. This is all just a recommendation.
Oh.
Now it goes to the Senate. And so for 2 weeks, Langer watches as his Senate colleagues debate his, quote, moral turpitude. So the anti-Langer argument here is basically the guy is dirty. He's unfit to serve. We all know this, right? The pro-Langer argument is, number one, he was democratically elected, right?
Yeah.
Number two, it doesn't actually say anywhere in the Constitution that senators need to be morally fit. So aren't we kind of complaining about nothing here? After 2 weeks, the Senate overwhelmingly votes to allow Bill Langer to remain in Congress. And then the Senate even pays Langer $16,500 to reimburse his legal fees.
I knew it. The Senate was not going to care. The Senate knows. The Senate's been around this. They've been around the block. They're not trying to get stuck in the little provincial North Dakotan politics and gossip. They're in D.C., baby. They've got other problems. 3 years ago, Hitler invaded Poland in this thing. Why? I mean, if there's not mental fortitude going on in Europe at this time, why is there going to be any in the U.S. Senate? That's my thought.
Well, I guess that basically answers my next question I was going to ask you, Luis, which was, do you think the Senate made the right decision? But I guess you're saying yes. So let's take a look at Senator Wild Bill Langer's record together, shall we?
Before you keep going, let the record state, I'm not saying they made the right decision, but I'm not surprised that this is the decision they made. You know,
Luis Mejia supports this man and any decision he makes henceforth. Let the record show. Okay, well, what are you saying? If you're the czar of the Senate, do you seat him or not?
I would, but not because. Again, I think I'm seeing this. If I'm leading this committee, I'm thinking, okay, hear me out. If I'm leading this committee, I'm thinking, listen, of all of us here, peers, colleagues, who hasn't done a little corruption, right? That's all. That's where I'm going to leave my statement.
That's true.
Kurt.
That's very true.
That's where I'm leaving my statement. I don't want to be seen as a hypocrite for not allowing him in. I'm the most mentally corrupt person I know, and I'd let him in. Why wouldn't I?
You're rich in moral turpitude.
Yes. Yes, I'm proud of it.
Okay, then. Well, with that being said, then let's get to Wild Bill Langer's record. So the first thing is that Bill Langer continued to help North Dakota farmers, particularly with regulating the price of wheat. He also pushed for better access to health care. He remained a strong isolationist. He was strongly opposed to the United States' involvement in World War II. He actually specifically, for some reason, really hated Winston Churchill. On one occasion, before Churchill's visit to America, Langer wrote a letter to a pastor in Boston asking him to hang 2 lanterns in the bell tower when Churchill arrived to warn Americans that the British were coming.
Nice, very nice. I like that. Symbolic.
Very nice.
Yeah.
He voted against the formation of the United Nations and also voted against the United States joining the UN. At the request of some African-American organizations, Langer proposed a bill for the U.S. government to fund repatriation for African Americans to Africa.
Oh.
So I don't know if you know, Luis, but that used to be a popular idea of that one way the U.S. government could pay their reparations was to fund if any African Americans wanted to return to where their ancestors had originally come from. The bill ultimately failed, but Langer tried it. Now we come to this 1950 incident. So Congress passed a law that would require communist organizations to register with the federal government. President Truman vetoed this law. Congress prepared to vote again, basically to override the veto, which they would need a 2/3 majority to do, but apparently they were confident they had that. Langer filibustered the vote for 5 hours before he collapsed and was carried out. So he, talked without stopping to stop them from voting for 5 hours until he collapsed.
This is an old man, too. Like at this point, what, 1950? He's not a young buck.
No, he's not a young buck anymore. He's an older man. He's well into his career. The bill did ultimately pass, but in typical American government fashion, there was some legislation that came after that basically undid everything that it did, so it ended up not mattering at all. Then there's also this 1944 incident. So in 1944, 26 U.S. government officials, including some sitting members of Congress, were on trial for sedition. Basically, they were being accused of being paid to spread Nazi propaganda in the U.S. and directly to U.S. citizens for the last few years. And once again, they are all guilty, by the way. For some reason, a couple weeks into the trial, Langer shows up in the courtroom unannounced. He greets and speaks with several of the defendants. Then he gives a speech about how they're being, quote, railroaded. Basically, he's like, hey, I know witch hunt when I see one. This is a witch hunt. Please note, not a witch hunt. It was not. But either way, that's where Langer chose to throw his hat in the ring.
Walks into a room very confident, saying, "This is not my first witch hunt." And they reply, "Yeah, it's not your second either."
Now we come to a little bit darker, this incident in 1951. First, I got to go back and give you some background info. So the Einsatzgruppen were the SS death squads that facilitated the Holocaust or any other mass executions.
Oh my God.
Basically, they were, I know this is a strong right turn here.
Yeah.
Basically, they were the portion of the German military that was responsible for carrying out torturing and killing for their ethnic cleansing. So in the Nuremberg trials, 24 commanders of the Einsatzgruppen got their own specific trial. The majority of them were sentenced to death. One of them who was sentenced to death was this man named Martin Sandberger. Bill Langer lobbied for Sandberger's sentence to be commuted down to a life sentence, and then through some political maneuvering, Sandberger was able to get himself released after only 13 years in custody. He ultimately died in 2010 at age 98. And you may wonder, why would Langer do this? Because Sandberger was not a scientist. He didn't end up working for the U.S. government or for anyone else in that capacity after his release. So to understand this, you have to understand that Bill Langer always stayed loyal to his individual constituents. Two things that contributed to his kind of never-ending, unstoppable political momentum. One of them was that Langer spent most of his campaigning efforts helping individual farmers and citizens. He somehow managed to govern while also making his constituents feel like he had all the time in the world to help them one by one. He would have the door to his office open even when he was governor and just help anyone who walked in. And he also would write letters to his constituents and keep in regular contact with anyone who would respond to him. him. The second thing is that Langer also pandered to his German-American voters, which was a voting bloc that he maintained his entire political career. Remember, he's from German-American parents,
Right.
so before speeches, he would actually often greet the crowd in both German and English. Langer held the belief that only top Nazi officials should be prosecuted aggressively, and this is maybe a result of his struggle to walk this line between American patriotism and pro-Germanicism. But ultimately, it seems Langer lobbied to save Sandberger because he didn't think that he necessarily deserved to die, which I guess is just his opinion. And he also was hoping to score some points with his German-American voters, which I guess hindsight is 2020 on that decision of getting the Nazi off.
Yeah, well.
And ever the enigma, Langer then voted for the Civil Rights Act of 1957.
Huh.
That was the last notable thing he did. Langer died while he was still in office in 1959 at age 73. And in typical Wild Bill fashion, he revived an outdated and very weird tradition of lying in state. So that means after he passed away, his body was briefly displayed in the Senate chamber.
Amazing.
I mean, that's it. You know, take it or leave it. That's Wild Bill. There he is,
Yeah,
dead corpse.
I like
right in the
you
center.
know, I knew that his German identity was going to come back. I was waiting for it from the very beginning. It was Chekhov's German heritage.
I was gonna say it's always Chekhov's heritage.
Chekhov's Germanitude. Wow. I love this man. He may have had his issues, but I think he was always clear, you know? You always knew what was going on.
Love him, hate him, but you can't deny the man could stick and move. A few people, you know, actually refer to him as like maybe the greatest theatrical political actor of the 20th century, which I mean, I think is could be pretty accurate because like this guy really beat the case every time.
I mean,
you know,
also let's be honest. One of the things that I really dislike about U.S. politics from about 5 years ago is that despite how much yelling and how much discord there is between senators and representatives, there's always this air of heraldry maintained by Congress and different public officials that is held mostly in U.S. Government institutions, something that you don't really see anywhere else in the world. Take, for example, Parliament in the UK. There's so much yelling. There's people screaming at each other live on television. Here in Mexico, people dress up to go to Senate hearings and to mock other people. There's a senator that dropped a bunch of fake rats onto a different senator saying, "You're a bunch of rats that are stealing money." So that kind of stuff is really fun. And we need to get away from the kabuki theater that is American politics. And that's why I'm really happy with Wild Bill. He brought back real politics. Get angry. Get witch hunted once or twice. Make noise as you go down, and if you're going up, ring the bells, baby. I like this man.
Yeah,
I like his
I mean,
attitude.
I'm gonna say it again. That's the American dream. Make up your own rules, then break those rules, then make up new rules. And if anybody doesn't like it, that's their problem. And that's what he did. He was just like, I'm here, I'm there, I'm the governor, I'm the senator. It's a witch hunt.
Raise up enough dust around you so that if anyone tries to complain, they'll just start coughing because they cannot see you.
Yeah, I think everybody really underestimated Wild Bill. No one was ever prepared for the force that this man was.
I love this man. I stand by my seal of approval of this man. I'm sorry. You did nothing to hurt his reputation in my brain. Still looking.
It is interesting how complex of a figure he is. Like, I think it's tough even to try to nail down what are his motivations here, because especially when he's saying like, oh, my trial is a witch hunt. And, you know, in hindsight, we know that he did actually do all those things. Kind of makes you wonder what actions does he do that he actually believes in, and what is he doing just because he knows they're popular. But beyond that, I mean, he really was like a complicated figure of the different things he supported. Just to start with, the definition of radical socialist farmer is like pretty wild as a jumping off point. But then even from there, he was just kind of all over the political spectrum in a way that it makes it really hard to nail down what were his real core intentions and beliefs, if any. Maybe it was just keep getting elected, to be honest.
That's the classic American move. And listen, he started off as a radical socialist and then really stayed proud of his German roots, which both of those things post World War II, big no-nos. So hey, good for him, I guess. To keep at it until his death, on his death.
That's true. Wild Bill never changed. He was Wild Bill through and through. You know, What are you gonna do? Take it or leave it.
Love.
You got it.
I
That's
love
it.
him. I will take it, Your Honor.
So, Luis, are you now feeling the American spirit within you? Have you found a newfound appreciation for the lunatics of this country?
I'm feeling it coursing through my veins once again, Kurt. It's been several years since I've had that feeling, but yeah, I feel it's nice. I feel like I just received a shot of amphetamines, but it's actually just America, the USA, the red, white, and blue, Kurt.
Maybe some LSD even. You never know.
Actually,
did the CIA give it to you?
I'm starting to hear voices. I think I can hear my parents speaking. Who knows? Maybe listen, no one, since you said earlier, no one can confirm nor deny that they were an MK Ultra. If I told you right now, and if I told everyone listening to this podcast that I did take part in MK Ultra, could be true.
That's true. We can't disprove it. Well, let's get to the most important, least favorite process of the show before you start tripping then, and that is
deliberation.
So, Luis,
boy,
I
Kurt.
told you about the goat tooth, which was then renamed to Carver's Point.
Lame.
Both terrible names. We would
Lame.
never do that on this podcast.
I
if
would
it was
never
up
do
to
that.
us. We're sorry to bring you such lackluster names.
Of course not.
The unclimbable, unnamed rock that was eventually spelunked all the way up by one Catherine Hahn, only to find that it had been climbed many years earlier, likely.
Yeah.
And then I told you about Wild Bill Langer, who was a lawyer, a governor, a state attorney general, a senator, but most of all, the man was just a slippery snake. And you can't pin him down. Look out. Even after he dies, he's literally still in the Senate. Can't get rid of him.
But most of all, a friend.
What do you think, Luis?
I liked it. Okay, Kurt, you know me too well that you know I love a story centered around a single person and a single person's shenanigans and things they did and accomplished or didn't accomplish throughout their life. So this was really nice to see you going all in on this, because regardless of which story is true, I am having a blast, and I am looking or listening to these stories with a haze over my eyes and childlike wonder with both of them, which is nice. It's a nice place to be. It's a nice place to go back to. I think most of us should. Now, when it comes to the real stories, that's where I'm starting to feel a little hesitant. On the one hand, like you mentioned, both of these stories are very much clear images of the stereotypical USA mindset of let's accomplish anything we can. Let's set ourselves expectations and then surpass them or not meet them. But if we don't meet them, that's also a success on us. You know, I like that's what both of these stories are all about. Wild Bill. Let me talk about Wild Bill real quick. I really like this. And we've always stated that early 20th century USA and that early 20th century USA politics are some of the most fun, most exciting, just really hilarious time periods to talk about. So I've had a lot of fun listening to all of this, and especially hearing how this person was a North Dakota native at this time. It adds a level of truthfulness to all of this, because all of these shenanigans are things like his entire background of being an attorney and then the state's attorney and everything he got away with. That's really, in my opinion, something that can only happen in fairly small communities, or at least in states where a little more provincial kind of places. And you see it to this day. You know, the most wild politics happening around the world happen in local governments and happen in small places. You know, you don't see all the craziness going on in Mexico City. Yeah. Rather, you see it in the periphery of Mexico, for example. And that's what adds a level of reality. I think at this point, I'm very much leaning towards the truthfulness of that story. That said, let's go to the story of Onus Carver.
All Onus.
Kurt, I love that story so much. I love Wile E. Coyote, and I love the Wile E. Coyote-ness of this story. However, something does not sit right with me. I mean, this is what, the 80s? So we can speak all we want about the potential Wild Westernness of the U.S. at this point, but it is already, you know, past the 50s. It's deep in Vietnam War, slightly post-Vietnam War era. I don't know, Kurt. I'm feeling against this story, especially too shimmying from a cave within all the way up a mountain. I don't know how much I'm willing to trust that, as much as I like to believe in a more magical world any opportunity I can. But that's seeming to.
But shimming, that's too far.
Yeah, please. That was one shimmy too much, Kurt. And although there were a lot of details, a lot of really fun details, like even Joseph Mars showing up to have his plans foiled by a spelunker, I don't know. That it seems like it was just details to throw me off, like we mentioned at the beginning of the show. So with that, I think you can see which one my answer is. I'm going to go with that. Wild Bill was the real story, and sadly, Carver Point, stupid name, Goat Tooth Peak is the false one.
So we are throwing away our American heroes of Onus Carver, Catherine Hahn, and Joseph Mars to instead embrace our American heroes of Wild Bill and Ollie Olson.
Yes.
That is correct, Luis. Wild Bill was truly the senator, governor, attorney, state general, and scoundrel of North Dakota.
I love it.
And yes, I made up. I sorry I couldn't come up with anything better than Goat Tooth Point or Goat Tooth Mountain and Carver's Point. I'll kill you.
See, Kurt, that's not what threw me off. If anything, I think that was one of the best details of the story. Because, when you're naming something after someone else, it's typically so boring, right? It becomes stupid, basically. So you got that right. So tell me, Kurt, is Goat Tooth Peak / Carver Point a real place?
No. The picture I sent you was just a picture of a mountain. I think it is actually one of the mountains in the Sawtooth Mountain range. So those are real. But I completely made up Goat Tooth Mountain. I completely made up Onus Carver. What I talked about with MK Ultra, that stuff was true. MK Ultra is just a wild thing that the U.S. government did.
Or was it?
But outside of that, everything was just completely made up.
Nice. That was good. That was really, really fun. I like that.
Yeah, it was a fun one. But let's talk about Wild Bill. So now that you know that's all true. And I feel like when I heard that, it was insane to me that I hadn't heard it before.
Yeah.
You know? Like, what is going on in North Dakota? That's insane.
Right. And I think it's that same idea of like, we hear these crazy things and it makes sense that they happened as much as they have the wildest details imaginable, right? Like, I'm listening to all of this, and like I mentioned, I can picture this happening. But like you said, the fact we've never heard of this man, that's crazy to me. Especially for someone to be a senator and have a nickname like Wild Bill.
Wild Bill Langer.
That's great.
Man, you gotta love him. I mean, he really was a scoundrel, but you gotta love him. You know, it is really interesting. You're talking about how like these type of things could only happen in certain areas. One of the things that really did contribute to his success is that he always had kind of 35-ish% of the North Dakotan voters behind him, because those were the ones who had interacted with him on a one-on-one basis, or were the German American voters who saw him more as like just this kind of local guy who, even though he's got a high office, is willing to help out the little guy. Then for the other, 60%, they're more seeing like all the bribes and corruption and stuff. But he was able to use the 35% to his advantage, where he could just add on to that or make it a three-way race where then he could split the vote. And so that's how they ended up in this weird situation where 60% of North Dakotans in the governor or in the Senate election would have voted, if it had just said like Bill Langer or someone else, they would have voted for someone else.
Yeah.
But since it had just like 3 different candidate names, he was the one who had the most votes.
Right.
But not actually the majority.
I think that's the most interesting part, that despite all his reputation, he was always someone that people voted for or wanted to vote for.
I mean, he knew how to work them. He knew how to work them, man.
He knew.
One of a kind guy,
I think he just knew his base, and he knew how to play to that base. Which is interesting.
Yeah,
and you know what?
He really did.
Going back again to these things could only happen in a place like North Dakota, and the fact that we've never heard about this, I just Googled Senator Wild Bill Langer, and I love that every single result, excluding his Wikipedia page, are from NorthDakotaStudies.com, NorthDakotaStudies.com, once again, University of North Dakota Scholarly Committee, the Bismarck-Mandan News, the High Plains Reader from Fargo. Like, all of this is just exclusively North Dakota items. I think he's probably a folk hero at this point in North Dakota. Mm-hmm. At least the source from the North Dakota Studies, it says that apparently he's a full section for 8th grade North Dakota studies. So,
as he should be, to be honest.
Every 8th grader in North Dakota probably learns about Wild Bill, which is fantastic.
Well, credit where credit is due to North Dakota for owning their history. But that's even funnier than that North Dakota is just like screaming to the world constantly about Wild Bill, and no one's listening.
Right? But you know what? We are, Kurt, and we're proudly listening to this.
And so, Luis, that brings our score to 6 for me, 4 for you. So it's closing a little bit. That's 1 point for you. You always love to see that on this podcast.
We're coming. We're coming back. It's been a dry period lately.
Either way, what's more important is that we had fun celebrating America's birthday month. Go America. Woot woot. Well, there you have it, folks. Hope you enjoyed listening. If you want to see some bonus content from our episodes, check us out on social media. We're on Instagram at UnbelievablePod and Twitter at UnbelievablePC. And remember, don't tangle with Bill Langer. You don't know what you're up against, okay? And you'll end up owing him $16,500. Bye.
See ya.